Hello friends, welcome back. Let us continue with our discussion regarding the contemporary theories of motivation. Today I am going to discuss about the self-efficacy theory proposed by Albert Bandura. Basically he proposed this theory pertaining to personality, but how an individual perceive himself to a certain extent capable of taking up any task or performing task as per his ability or competency, that also leads to motivation. This theory is also known as social cognitive theory or social learning theory and refers to an individual's belief that he or she is capable of performing a task. Imagine any situation that any individual has this thought process about himself or perception about himself that no doubt I am qualified, I am educated, I am experienced, but I cannot take up any particular task. On the contrary, any individual who is qualified, well educated, competent and able, and he has this confidence in himself that I can perform any task. That defines an individual's perception about his own abilities, that to what extent he is efficacious or able to perform any task, and that defines his extent of self-efficacy. So, the higher the self-efficacy, the more an individual is motivated, confident to succeed or achieve any goal. In fact, in difficult situations, people with low self-efficacy will tend to reduce their efforts to resolve any conflict, to resolve any problem or meet up the goal, whereas people with high self-efficacy, they will accept the challenge and they will put lot of efforts to perform the task and consider it as a challenge, which gives them enough motivation that they will be able to complete the task. So, this is the difference between an individual having high level of self-efficacy or low self-efficacy. Therefore, self-efficacy can create a positive spiral in which those with high self-efficacy become more engaged in their task and in turn increase performance, which also increases efficacy and heightened motivation levels. That means how self-efficacy can motivate an individual and what are the consequence of perceiving oneself as highly competent is that the person is more engaged in the task, he is ready to put in more efforts to resolve the conflict or take up the challenge, and most importantly he finds difficulty in detaching from that job or task unless he reaches the goal. So, this is self-efficacy theory of Albert Bandura. But yes, how the person gets motivated. So, how self-efficacy can be increased among employees? Organizations implement different kind of strategies and ways that how self-efficacy of an employee can be increased, which leads to heightened motivation and goal achievement. So, there are 4 ways according to Bandura that self-efficacy can be increased among employees. It is inactive mastery, vicarious modeling, verbal persuasion and arousal. These are the 4 ways. But yes, to mention here that even these 4 ways are not any strategies or techniques that we implement and the self-efficacy can be heightened. These are basically psychological concepts that are well understood in human behavior at work, that how an individual can alter his behavior based on these ways, and these alterations are made in human behavior itself, either made by the organization or by an individual himself or herself. So, the first is inactive mastery. This is the most important source of increasing self-efficacy, that is gaining relevant experience with the task or job, and if you have been able to do the job successfully in the past, you are more confident and able to do it in the future. So, the more you gain experience in performing a particular task, the more you become competent, the more an individual becomes capable to perform the same task in future with lot of lucidity and more ease, which reflects an individual's heightened level of self-efficacy. Now, this technique as inactive mastery can be observed in the form of various training programs where people practice and build their skills. In fact, one reason training works is that it increases self-efficacy. So, people who are performing a task need to enhance their skills. So, in order to improve their performances, they upgrade themselves through training programs and they tend to enhance a previously performed task in a more better way. That is inactive mastery. Further, individuals with higher levels of self-efficacy also appear to reap more benefits from training programs and are more likely to use their trainings on the job. That is but obvious that person who is able or who has the opportunity to enhance his skills through inactive mastery will not only add on his skills based on his experiences, but yes, he becomes more efficacious in performing the task. That is, there is heightened self-efficacy. The other is vicarious modeling. In general term, which means that when we observe people and get motivated and perceive ourselves to be more efficacious, competent or ability. So, it is to become more confident because we see someone else doing the task. When other person is doing a task which is more interesting, challenging, we also get motivated by observing the person who is performing the task, and we also develop that ability about ourselves that we can also do it. So, this is vicarious modeling. For example, if your friend slims down, it increases your confidence that you can also lose weight. Similarly, at workplaces, if your co-worker has performed any high level task and is successful, we also tend to observe the same person and we also perceive ourselves competent enough, more efficacious, that I can also perform the same task. This is vicarious modeling. So, this is the most effective when you are yourself as similar to the person you observe. So, maybe two employees are at the same level, they have the same level of abilities, qualifications and education, even experience. But if your co-worker is performing a high level task, we also get motivated and perceive ourselves to be competent enough to perform the same task, no matter how much is the difficulty level. But yes, there are situations, for example, watching Tiger Woods play a difficult golf shot might not increase your confidence in being able to play the shot yourself. But if you watch a golfer with a handicap similar to yours, it is persuasive. So, this is something that again we tend to bank upon people with whom we can relate, and then only we can chart out our own abilities and competencies with the other person, and we tend to motivate ourselves. This is another way to enhance self-efficacy, that is vicarious modeling. Alright, the other is arousal. This increases self-efficacy and leads to an energized state. So, the person gets psyched up and performs better. But if the task requires a steady lower key perspective, say carefully editing a manuscript, arousal may in fact hurt performance. Now, this is something that according to the type of task the person performs and perceive himself accordingly. For example, it leads to an energized state, so the person gets psyched up. Psyched up means that he is mentally active, that I am going to perform this task, and he tends to perform better. But if a task requires a steady lower key perspective, say carefully editing a manuscript, arousal may in fact hurt performance. So, there can be some inconsistency that what kind of task you have to perform and what is your mental energy. So, there has to be a parity in your mental state and the type of task you have to perform. If it is matching, then the self-efficacy is enhanced. The other is verbal persuasion. It is to become more confident because someone convinces you that you have the skills necessary to be successful, and motivational speakers use this tactic. Another co-worker is highlighting your skills, abilities, competencies, that you are fit for a particular job, you can perform any job better than anybody else. This is in way to convince a person based on his knowledge, skills and abilities, that is verbal persuasion. Maybe any senior authority, any motivational speaker will tend to motivate you based on your abilities, competencies, knowledge, skills, and the person enhances his self-efficacy with this confidence that even he or she can perform any task. Now, these kind of ways, no matter we are talking about arousal, verbal persuasion, vicarious modeling or inactive mastery, the consequences that employees are motivated to take up any high level task or perform any high level task. So, the best way for a manager to use verbal persuasion is through the Pygmalion effect or the Galatea effect. So, this is a form of self-fulfilling prophecy in which believing something can make it true. It is for oneself and others as well. For oneself, that I am a great poet, I am a great performer, and when we perform a task, definitely the outcome is enhanced, it is heightened, the performance is heightened because what you are thinking about to an extent about your ability, the consequence also is according to that. Now, this ability, perception of your own ability can be from high to low or moderate as well. there has been one experiment in a study where some teachers were informed about students of their class possessing high IQ scores. And it was found that with that consisting with the Pygmalion effect, the teachers spent more time with the students. They thought they are smart, intelligent, and they gave all the challenging assignments to the students, and ultimately all led to higher student self-efficacy and better grades. And students were also informed that they have higher IQ. So, they also had the same kind of perception about their own efficacy and abilities, and same perception was made by the teachers. So, both the sides that the perception was high for the students, they also performed well, knowing that they know much better. So, this led to enhanced self-efficacy and better grades. So, this strategy is also used in the workplace. For example, say in sailors who were told convincingly that they would not get seasick were in fact much likely to do so. So, conveying a message to the co-workers or even sailors that they are competent enough to face any challenge or perform any task, the employees also develop the same perception for themselves and ultimately they perform well. So, this is Pygmalion effect, which is based on self-fulfilling prophecy, that it is not that the other person is saying to us or any employee that you are a better performer or you are the best performer. The person, the target person also tends to perceive the same about himself, and this leads to a positive outcome. This is known as Pygmalion effect or the Galathea effect based on self-fulfilling prophecy. So, here it is self-fulfilling prophecy about oneself and others, which is most of the time positive, and the consequence is also positive because it is based on an individual's competency. Okay. Since we have also discussed about goal setting theory in the previous, and we have just now talked about self-efficacy theory, it is also said that goal setting theory and self-efficacy theory, they both complement each other. There is some kind of relationship when we talk about goal setting and self-efficacy theory. Why? Because employees whose manager sets difficult goals for them will have a high level of self-efficacy or set higher goals for their own performance. When authorities assign any challenging task to the employees, it is not that the task has been assigned to them. Even the employees also have this thought or perspective or even perception that if they have been assigned a particular challenging task, that means they possess that ability to perform that task. So, that enhances their self-efficacy, and goal setting is also high, that they have to achieve their goal based on their competency and abilities. So, goal setting and self-efficacy complement each other. When goal setting is high, then self-efficacy is also heightened. Setting difficult goals for people communicates managers' confidence in employees. Imagine you learn your boss sets a higher goal for you than your co-workers. So, one person, one worker among the team has been assigned a challenging task that indicates that the person is more competent to perform any challenging task. So, this heightens the sense of self-efficacy within that person, and ultimately the goal setting also becomes high, that he has to perform the best. So, this is about the relationship between goal setting and self-efficacy theory and how to interpret. Again, as I mentioned, that it is a psychological process. So, as long as you did not feel you were being picked on, you would probably think, well, I guess my boss thinks I am capable of performing better than others. Definitely this will be an impression or perception of an individual about himself. This sets a motion, that is a psychological process in which you are more confident in yourself, that is self-efficacy is heightened obviously. And when the self-efficacy is heightened, the personal goals are also set high, which leads to enhanced performances, which is both inside and outside the workplace. So, the kind of confidence that an individual as an employee develops when he is being assigned a task among all the employees, the challenging task, that enhances his self-efficacy, that enhances his confidence, and most importantly he is motivated to perform to higher levels within and outside the organization, because that self-efficacy and esteem, self-esteem that is heightened has also spillover effect on the other domains of his life. So, this is a diagrammatic representation of the joint effects of goals and self-efficacy and performance. So, when the manager sets difficult tasks difficult specific goal for job or task, then the individual has confidence that given level of performance will be attained. That means there is heightened self-efficacy, and at the same time the individual sets higher personal goals for their performance. That is his determination that I have to perform to the maximum in order to meet the goal that has been set by the organization and by himself. So, goal setting and self-efficacy both are heightened, which leads to higher level of job performance. So, this is the relationship between goal setting and efficacy theory which complement each other. This is about self-efficacy theory, but ultimately high performance is there because there is sense of motivation that I have to achieve the goal, and that motivates an individual, right. Alright. The next comes reinforcement theory given by B.F. Skinner. Basically, he has given a behavioristic perspective based on reinforcement, that how human behavior can be conditioned based on the consequences of his responses. If the response is avoided, then the behavior is repeated. If the response is punished, the behavior or the response is avoided. This is the Skinner's behavioristic perspective about reinforcement theory, that how reinforcement leads to enhanced performances. So, what controls behavior? Positive behavior is reinforced and negative behavior is punished. So, what controls behavior is reinforcer, that is the consequence. When immediately following responses increases the probability that the behavior will be repeated. So, any response that is rewarded, that reward is the reinforcer, that this behavior will be repeated. So, this is about reinforcement behavioristic opinion. So, the point is that how this reinforcement will take place. Reinforcement theory ignores basically the inner state of the individual and concentrates solely on what happens when he or she responds to a stimulus. The person's innate tendencies are ignored, maybe the individual will also ignore his innate tendencies, but yes, he is more concerned how he is responding to the stimulus in the environment and to what extent that response is punished or rewarded. If it is rewarded, it is repeated. If it is punished, it is not repeated. So, this suggests that behavior is a function of its consequences. The response will decide the consequence and the consequence will decide the behavior, whether it is repeated or reinforced or punished. So, this is about reinforcement theory. Now, how it works at workplaces. So, B.F. Skinner advocates that creating pleasing consequences to follow specific forms of behavior would increase the frequency of that behavior. That means, when consequences are pleasant, they will repeat the behavior. If the consequences are unpleasant, it will not. We touch a live wire, the experience is unpleasant, we will not repeat it. We perform at workplaces to the maximum, it is rewarded, we would like to enhance or repeat that behavior. Similarly, it is demonstrated at workplaces as well. For management, that people learn to behave to get something they want or to avoid something that they do not want. For example, unlike reflexive or unlearned behavior, operant behavior is influenced by the reinforcement or lack of reinforcement brought about by its consequences. So, he demonstrated that people will most likely engage in desired behaviors if they are positively reinforced. For doing so, the rewards are most effective in form of repeating the behavior, that is the effect of the reward on the consequence. If they immediately follow the desired response and that behavior that is not rewarded or is punished is less likely to be repeated. Therefore, reinforcement strengthens our behavior and increases the likelihood it will be repeated. That is the perspective, basic tenet of reinforcement theory. So, how it is applied at workplaces. This is an example. A commissioned salesperson wanting to earn a sizable income finds doing so is considered on generating high sales in his territory. Of course, the linkage can also teach individuals to engage in behaviors that work against their best interest of the organization. Or assume your boss says if you work overtime during the next 3 weeks, you will be compensated for it. That means you will be compensated in your next performance appraisal. However, when performance appraisal time comes, you are given no positive reinforcement for your overtime. So, that is a jerk that any employee would tend to experience. So, the next time when your boss asks you for overtime, what will you do? the response to such kind of negative consequence is definitely going to be a definite answer, that is no. You will probably decline, and your behavior can be explained by operant conditioning, that is reinforcement, that if a behavior fails to be positively reinforcement, the probability it will be repeated declines. This is so obvious. Similarly, if had it been in the opposite situation, that the overtime was compensated in the next appraisal, definitely that behavior would have been repeated in the next turn. So, the point is that when we are talking about reinforcement, it actually influences the motivational process, that whenever we are performing any behavior, when the behavior is not rewarded, the motivation will also be low. Similarly, if it is rewarded, the motivation level is high, that reinforces not only the behavior but also performance, because the person engages in a motivational cycle, that how any need, drive, motives, incentives are being systematically arranged in that cycle, that it is not only about performance, but the psychological process of motivational cycle also gets enhanced and convinced. This is about reinforcement theory. The other is social learning theory, developed by Bandura. If we have talked about vicarious modeling, then coming back to this social learning theory, it is an extension to vicarious modeling. Why? Because when we observe someone, then also we are motivated, we learn some new perspectives, we are motivated, and ultimately we perform that behavior. So, what is social learning theory in organizational behavior? So, individuals can learn by being told, or so by observing what happens to other people, as well as through direct experiences. Much of what we have learned comes from watching models. It can be your parents, teachers, your bosses, your co-workers. They have different perspectives, they have different styles, they possess different skills to perform, and we tend to observe and learn number of behaviors and want to perform. This is social learning theory. So, the view what we can learn through both observation and direct experience is called social learning theory, where there is no training program, there is no reinforcement, but yes, only through observation and direct experience we tend to learn and perform and get motivated. Social learning theory is an extension of operant conditioning, that is, it assumes behavior is a function of consequences, and it also acknowledges the effects of observational learning and perception. So, when we even observe any behavior, whether it is reinforced, punished, or rewarded, then also it gives some direct experience to us, whether I should also perform the same behavior or not. That defines your motivational level. If the other co-worker has been rewarded for his behavior, through direct experience and observation, we also tend to learn the same pattern of behavior to perform. If the other co-worker has been punished for his behavior, then through direct experience and observations, we also tend to understand the consequence of that behavior, and our learning says that we should also not repeat that behavior. This is the operant conditioning or behaviorist perspective of social learning theory. So, people respond to the way that they perceive and define consequences, not to the objective consequences themselves. Okay, so how this social learning takes place? Bandura has identified a model which is central to the social learning, that how this process of social learning takes place. So, there are 4 processes: attentional process, retention process, motor reproduction process, and reinforcement process. What is attentional process? People learn from a model only when they recognize and pay attention to its critical features. We tend to be most influenced by models that are attractive, repeatedly available, important to us, or similar to us in our estimation. So, we only pay attention to those stimulus factors in the environment which are relevant to us. The more focus we are making on those relevant stimulus or people or situations in the environment, the more we learn from those instances. This is attentional process, that on what stimulus in the environment will draw our attention, and we will focus more on those stimulus in that situation. This is attentional process. So, again getting into attention means finding relevancy of the stimulus with oneself and recognize and then pay attention. So, what are the features of any particular situation, of any particular person or stimulus in the environment, and how we tend to grab put more focus on those processes. The other is retention process. That is fine, that some stimulus have drawn our attention based on our relevance, but the next step is that to what extent we tend to remember the model, that is the stimulus that becomes a model or based on our attention. It is not that we just observe and we just throw it away from our memory. To what extent it remains in our memory, so that we are able to recollect the whole learning or observation, that is the next process, that is retention. The model's influence depends on how well the individual remembers the model's action after the model is no longer readily available. For example, any co-worker who has performed a task in a particular manner, demonstrated the functioning of a machine in a particular manner, and it is relevant to us, then it is a responsibility of the observer to put it in his memory for a longer period of time, even in the absence of that performer. This is a retention process. The other is motor reproduction process. After a person has seen a new behavior by observing the model, watching must be converted into doing. That is, whatever we have observed, we have remembered or memorized. The next step is to perform the same behavior or action, bring it into action, that is motor reproduction process. This demonstrates that the individual can perform the modeled activities. So, through observation, through focus, attention and memory, the person tries to remodel the activity based on his memory, that is motor reproduction. A person sees a new behavior, observe and then perform. And the last is reinforcement process. Individuals are motivated to exhibit the model behavior if positive incentives are rewarded, are provided, and positively reinforced behaviors are given more attention, learned better and performed more often. Now, the whole process will come into action only when the model, the complete attention is still the outcome of the behavior of the model, that to what extent the behavior of the model has been punished or rewarded. It is not only based on attention, not only your memory, not only just remodeling that activity, that what was the outcome of the modeling will also contribute to an individual's learning. Now, the point is, if the individuals are motivated to exhibit the model behavior, if positive incentives or rewards are provided, they will definitely indulge themselves in the whole process of social learning, that is attentional, retention, motor and reinforcement process. Positively reinforced behaviors are given more attention, learned better and performed more often. So, this is an individual's attention process finally, that after focusing on the particular behavior in the environment, what is the last outcome of his behavior and to what extent the observer will decide that whether I will remodel this behavior or not based on the consequence. This whole process defines the motivation of an individual, that whether the behavior is rewarded, the person will remodel the whole behavior. If the behavior or the outcome of the behavior is not reinforced, it is punished, then the person would hesitate, would inhibit himself to perform that behavior or remodel that behavior. So, this is the social learning theory, which is completely based on observation or direct experiences, that if the other person has performed this behavior, to what extent it is punishable or rewarding, and the other person also will remodel the same behavior in that same intensity. So, these are the aspects that how a social learning takes place based on this model of attention process, retention process, motor reproduction process and reinforcement process. So, this is about social learning theory, reinforcement theory and self-efficacy theory, which are labeled as contemporary theories of motivation in organizational behavior. So, we will continue about the next theory in the next session. Thank you so much.